So it is 4 o'clock in Paris, 3 o'clock in London, and I don't know what time elsewhere in the world. Good evening, good morning, good day, and welcome to today's UFI Connects session. My name is Kai Hattendorf. I will be your moderator today. Now, UFI Connects is a series of online talks, panels, and discussions that we began back in March as COVID-19 closed down our own regular events. We run these sessions to do our share in keeping the industry connected, up to date, and ready for the recovery. On that note, next slide, please, Pascal, a short reference to a special guide that we released yesterday, a good practice guide on addressing COVID-19 requirements for reopening business events. It's a document of references and emerging standards that we have worked together on with our colleagues from AIPC and Acker. You find resources like this and many others on our designated page on the UFI.org website for COVID-19 at ufi.org/coronavirus. I hope you find it useful. On to today. The success of exhibitions and trade shows after the COVID-19 pandemic will depend on two key elements. First, we have the permission from the authority, first we have to have the permission back from the authorities to run our events, and second, we need the confidence of exhibitors and attendees to actually come to the shows. In this UFI Connects, we are focusing on the side of the exhibitors. What is the sentiment of their businesses and their decision makers right now? What are they expecting organizers and venues to deliver when they return? What can we do separately and as an industry to build their confidence into our marketplaces and meeting places? We have three outstanding speakers ready to go today. Lisa Hannant, the Group Managing Director of ClarionEvents, Randal Acker, President and COO of the Exhibitor Media Group, and Sophie Holt, Global Strategy Director from Explori in the UK. Now, all of you in the audience, you are on mute while they speak. So please put the questions you already have into the chat function at the bottom of the screen. The UFI team will select them and they will call on you to ask the questions live later on in the session, live on air. Now, I look forward to this discussion, and first to all three of our speakers. So Sophie, why don't you start and pick up on where we essentially were in the relationship between our industry and the exhibitors as COVID struck?
Thanks, Kai. What I'm going to share with you this afternoon is some context about what we understand about our exhibitor experience up until now. What sort of relationship were we carrying into this crisis with our exhibitors? So let me do the hard bit and try and share the correct screen and see if that works. Okay, so I'm going to look at the aspects that might help us to understand where our recovery might come from in the exhibitor relationship. At the moment, our current performance of trade shows globally in the eyes of our exhibitors is stable, but I think it's pretty fair to say that there is some room for improvement. And I'm going to really dive into how critical return on investment is for exhibitors and how they perceive trade shows in general. And some interesting insight from our recent Global Exhibitor Insights project that might help us to think about our reliance on visitor numbers in terms of our marketing message to exhibitors and where we might take that in future. And finally, just some reassuring information that there really is a commercial advantage for organisers that get their exhibitor experience right. So firstly, looking at this big global study we did at the tail end of last year, thousands of trade show exhibitors responded from all around the world. And we said, are trade shows getting better or worse? And we can see over the last 4 years from this study and also from Explori's global benchmarks, where we work with post-event surveys from trade shows all around the world, we can actually see that our Net Promoter Score, which is a really important way of understanding the overall relationship we have with our exhibitors, On an individual show level, is actually quite stable, although it's in the negative at between sort of -19 and -15. This means that we've got a stable performance in the eyes of our exhibitors, but they're generally not very actively recommending exhibiting at the trade shows that they've just supported. But when we look at the channel as a whole, when we're asking those exhibitors, not just how did they experience the show that they've just exhibited at, but how likely are they to recommend trade shows as a channel to a colleague, we see something a little bit different. And I've sort of given this the analogy of a good house in a bad neighbourhood. So if you are a homeowner, maybe a renter, you might spend lots of money investing in your property. You want the outside to look nice, you might have a nice garden. But actually, if you live in a bad neighbourhood and the streets and the houses around you are not desirable, no matter how nice your house is, the value is going to be pulled down by the neighbourhood you live in. And I think we're seeing something similar in the trade show sector, because when we're asking about the channel as a whole, we're seeing a lower net promoter score now. We're seeing a net promoter score of -25. And I think what's driving that is many of the exhibitors that responded to us exhibited at several different shows over the year. The average was 8 shows a year. So in the context of the results Randy's going to be presenting soon, that's relatively few, but it's still multiple shows a year and presumably a significant investment. And I think whilst there's really high performing trade shows in every sector, in every geography, in terms of their exhibitor experience, if a marketer is supporting 8 shows a year, perhaps they're having enough poor experiences to outweigh the good experiences they're having. So this goes to show that exhibitor experience right across our channel is everybody's problem. Even if you're sat as the head of a trade show that you know has really strong exhibitor experience, if they're having poor experience elsewhere, it's going to impact on their confidence in returning to trade shows as a channel. And I know it's not a huge surprise, but exhibitor return on investment is absolutely critical. The full report, which shows all the different areas of the exhibitor journey and how they impact on Net Promoter Score, is available in the members area of the UFI website, or contact me and I can provide a copy. But the lowest Net Promoter Scores we saw in this survey response weren't about the cost of the booth, they weren't about the service that they received from the organiser, or it wasn't even about Wi-Fi. It was about the quality and quantity of leads that they achieved through the trade show. Now we're going to dive now into Explori's global benchmarking data, and this is really useful because it's very standardized data collected from thousands of trade shows around the world, so it allows us to cut it in lots of different ways to get insight. I'm going to show you possibly, I would say this is my favourite chart. I don't know what that says about me, but there are 3 things that we need to look at when we're understanding this chart. Now, the first thing is the size of those balls. The bigger those balls, or the bigger those bubbles, the more of our exhibitors say that is an objective when they attend a trade show. The higher up it is on the chart, the more successful they are at achieving the objective. Now, I don't know what way around this is showing for you, whether it's going to be mirror image, but the further it is to my right in the direction with the correlation with satisfaction arrow, that's how closely that objective is correlated with the overall satisfaction of that exhibitor. And if we look, I've just circled them in green. These are the kind of branding objectives. And again, I think Randy's study later has got some interesting thoughts on trade shows and branding for exhibitors, really commonly held objective, but actually that our exhibitors are pretty good at meeting those objectives when they have access to live events. But the critical one here is circled in red. That's generating new sales leads. It's a really commonly held objective. In fact, it's the most commonly held objective. It's very highly correlated with satisfaction. Yeah, as you can see, it's quite low down the chart. Our exhibitors aren't routinely successful at meeting that objective. So as we build the trade shows in new normal, whatever that looks like, we have to really understand how we're going to deliver return on investment for our exhibitors. And that could be through our pricing, but most likely it's about working with them to understand how they're going to measure ROI and how they're going to achieve it with the audience that you're now able to deliver. I just want to touch on trust as well. Trust was a big theme of the UFI Global Congress at the tail end of last year. And we looked at trust between the exhibitors and first of all, their customers. And this is really reassuring news. Exhibitors at trade shows think that face-to-face is the most effective platform for building trust amongst their own customers, with a large majority saying it was value or very effective, and notably much more effective than other marketing channels that they had access to, like for example social media or perhaps digital advertising. They really believed in the power of face-to-face to build trust. But let's flip that round and say, how much trust do they place in us as an industry? And this was a bit more concerning. I've designed this slide because sometimes we ask these questions positively, sometimes negatively. What we would want to see on a slide like this is that the green bubble, whether it's to the left or right, is nice and big. And if we say trade show organisers tend to treat their exhibitors fairly, just over half agree. Now, remember, this was before we've been through cancellations, postponements and contract negotiations. So I think you'll see on your own shows probably quite a big story around how you handled that. Did you use it as an opportunity to build increased trust with your exhibitors, or was it handled in a way that might damage trust? But I promised we'd talk about visitor numbers as well. My background's in trade show marketing, and visitor numbers is such a huge part of my role, growing visitor numbers year on year, and also communicating these numbers to organisers. But we can see here that actually only just over a quarter of our exhibitors actually place trust in us to report our visitor numbers accurately. So this big story that we were using to bring in exhibitors actually had gone a little bit stale in their eyes. They didn't really buy into these ideas of these increasingly larger and larger visitor numbers. And they're really looking to that ROI, which is driven much more by visitor quality and the exhibitor's ability to interact with those visitors. So if we're moving to shows that perhaps have decreased number of visitors, as long as we switch to ROI and quality of interaction, we may not be damaged by not being able to deliver those really high visitor numbers in future, because actually it wasn't a story that was compelling anymore for our exhibitors. And finally, I'll just quickly take you through some research that we did that mapped the growth phase that a show was in with their exhibitor net promoter score. And you can see on 3 main drivers of growth: visitor numbers, the band at the top, that shows that have a positive exhibitor NPS, and the band at the bottom that shows that have negative. And we can see that almost all the shows with a positive exhibitor NPS were growing their visitor numbers. Not surprising, because exhibitors are a huge source of visitor numbers. And again, much more likely that those shows with a positive exhibitor NPS were growing their exhibitor numbers. And actually, if you had a negative exhibitor NPS, you were equally likely to be declining as you were growing. And finally, the exhibitor revenue. Again, a huge amount of growth in those with a positive score, and much more modest than the negative score. But what's interesting here is that shows with a positive exhibitor NPS were able to grow their revenue ahead of their exhibitor numbers. So that's suggesting they were increasing yield from their exhibitors, as well as just increasing pure exhibitor numbers. Now, I think as we go into the end of this year and early next year, where we have to try and encourage exhibitors back to our trade shows, this story might not be about the ability to grow that trade show. It might well be a story of survival, so that with organisers that can deliver a great exhibitor experience actually being the ones that survive, and perhaps a different story for those who don't. So just to summarise, there's room for improvements in a lot of aspects of the exhibitor experience, but particularly focusing on return on investment for the exhibitor. Improving that experience drives growth, And there's a big opportunity for organisers who can become more customer-centric to achieve more commercially. But like we said, this data was gathered at the tail end of last year. Things are changing very, very rapidly. So we're working again with UFI over this summer, and this project is about to launch, to go out and talk to as many visitors and exhibitors as we can around the world to really expand on some of the work that Randy's done and is about to present later. If you visit insights.explori.com, you can register your interest to participate, and we'll be sharing a lot more on social media in the coming days. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Sophie. It is indeed sobering to say that focusing on the customer may lead to survival rather than growth of the show, but here we are in the age of COVID with securing the license to operate and convincing attendees to return to our shows. The beautiful thing of it, or the positive thing of it, is we won't really need to focus on whistles and bells. Running the marketplace, connecting supply and demand will be what is on everyone's mind. So, but let's cross over to the States. Randy, you've done amazing research into the minds of exhibitors in the US in recent weeks, and I actually find some of their feedbacks very encouraging.
Yeah, it runs a whole wide range. We fielded a study the first week of May. We're going to field some follow-up studies. We'll be fielding another one here probably in a couple of weeks to see how the mood changes as so many changes happen with COVID impacting protocols, and what's going to happen and what's going to open when. We want to be able to really gauge what the corporate marketer's point of view is on trade shows and corporate events coming back to life. So in the study, we feel that we got about 1,000 responses, and 600 and some of them were corporate marketers, and the balance were suppliers to the industry, the people who help them execute their program. Kai and I had a conversation about some of the highlights out of this presentation, which our editor, Travis Stanton, really drove this process and did an exhibitor insight presentation on this. And Kai will share the link to be able to get to the white paper for the full 18-page report. But today I'm going to share some of the key highlights that Kai and I talked about. Really, we want to understand, when do people feel like that they're going to come back to trade shows? And as you can see from the graphic on the screen, right now there's only 13% that definitely will and 18% that probably will. The chart isn't as big as we would like to say that they plan on coming back in 2020, but the data is the data, and we want to share with the audience today what the respondents have to say. Next slide, please, Pascal. So when you start to ask the question, all right, what did they know the beginning of May? When do they feel like their next show was going to be that they participated in? I love the optimism of some of these people, but as you look, you're seeing that the bulk of the people really aren't coming back until late summer, early fall. And then thankfully, only 5% have no plans of coming back in 2020. We'll see how those numbers continue to evolve. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest challenges is going to be what's happening with travel restrictions. We as an organizer, trade show community, and all the people that are stakeholders that make it happen, we can plan all this and put the protocols in place, but will the corporations have travel bans that make that impossible? Will risk managers and lawyers say that the liability of sending people outside of the office is too big, and therefore we're going to restrict the travel ban? The graphic on the left shows that 90% of the respondents currently have a travel ban, and sadly 63% of them have no idea when it's going to go away. That certainly creates some challenges. When you look at when they view that they're going to come back, regardless, most countries around the globe have some kind of a shelter in place, stay-at-home order. 58% of the respondents came back and said, I probably won't go until 3 months after the release of the shelters in place. And I think some of what we're seeing around the globe kind of follows that path. So we'll see if it remains a global metric as we go forward with more places being able to launch. Next slide, please. So we certainly wanted to be able to know, all right, what has happened with their trade show and event marketing budgets. And right now, as you can see from the graphic, 20% have been reduced, 27% have been frozen, and a quarter of them have been redirected to other sales and marketing channels. If we can't do face-to-face, then we've got to find ways to grow our businesses. So they've redirected some of that money. Next slide, please. So the question becomes, who is doing the work? If we're getting the planning, we're putting things forward. The corporate marketers saw a great decline in the Great Recession that we survived from 2008, 9, 10. And they never saw their numbers come back to their marketing departments. Many times their suppliers picked up and became extensions to some of their corporate sales and marketing objectives. The data on the slide right now shows that 19% of them have had furloughs, 21% of them have had layoffs. You're seeing that on average, you're seeing a pretty significant impact again on their marketing departments. We'll see how that plays out like in comparison to the Great Recession and what happened. But 51% of them have responded back saying that they've been assigned additional duties. The ones that were lucky enough to be able to stay on the job, they're doing more digital marketing, they're doing more social media pushing, they're actually doing long-term planning. We've actually had a number of major corporations reach out to us for, can we provide group training for their sales and marketing departments now that they're not actively engaged in shows. So they're taking that opportunity for training and development and long-term planning. Certainly there are people dabbling in virtual events. And one of the best things I think can happen for trade shows is now they have time to go back and nurture the leads that they got from other past trade shows that oftentimes maybe didn't get the attention based on bandwidth. So a little bit of a redirect on what they're being asked to do. Next slide, please. So we know what's happened to the individual people, we know what's happened to the budget, but what's happening to their company overall? And this graphic is certainly impactful that 50% have either had a very significant or significant impact on their business. Across 600 some respondents, we have readers in every SIC sector known to man, from Fortune 1000 companies all the way down to mom and pops. And this aggregated data shows that 50% of them have had significant impact. So next slide, please. Sophie talked a little bit about some of this stuff and what are they trying to accomplish in participating in trade shows. And so we asked them, the fact that you've now had cancellations and corporate events were canceled first and trade shows started coming second, a lot of their face-to-face stuff was very challenged. And 70% have come back and said, it's really impacted my ability to develop leads for sales. It's made it tough for us to do branding and awareness. And I think that one of the things that Sophie was talking about that face-to-face does better than anything else on the planet, it does build trust. And it also has the ability to see it, feel it, taste it, touch it, experience it that no other marketing medium can. And that has really impacted people's ability that had product launches in the mix that now that had been taken away from them. You couldn't see and feel the quality of the product. Anybody can go online and research this stuff, but they go to trade shows to actually see it and experience it. Certainly the brand awareness, Sophie also talked about that as part of that grid of success by participating in trade shows. Next slide, please. So if we can't do face-to-face marketing, then we have to pursue other channels. And if we can't do face-to-face, we're going after virtual. All of us are living on Zoom calls. And this slide shows the people who have considered and the people who have implemented already. And you can see that there is high engagement in webinars and virtual and social media through the roof. We asked them a follow-up component to that, how was the virtual event side. 44% are actually hosting virtual events, and 56% of them are attending virtual events. All right, so we removed the opportunity for face-to-face. We jumped into virtual platforms, but how are they working? Next slide, please. So we asked them, given your experience with those virtual events, how are they comparing? And there's a wide range of responses that have been open-ended responses, from one that's circulated all over LinkedIn, that was a quote that came from a respondent early on that said, if I can't have a speaking engagement as part of this virtual event to bring my subject matter expert into the conversation, then virtual events are virtually useless. And so when you look at the response, you're seeing that, yeah, virtual events are adequate, but they can't accomplish the same things that the face-to-face environment can do. But I need to do something. And you're back to Sophie's comment earlier that I'm a firm believer on. Face-to-face builds trust better than any other channel that exists. I think that when you look at the side comment, eventually people will be very ready to resume the professional and immersive experience that only an in-person event can provide. That just helps to reinforce that people are missing our platform for sales and marketing. Next slide, please. Sophie made a comment about this earlier as well. We every January issue an economic outlook study that goes into a broad range of how they view their programs. Are they having successes? How and why? A lot of some of the things that Sophie was mentioning. And in that response, they came back to us in January pre-COVID and said, we anticipate doing 56 events in 2020. Now that COVID has impacted the first week of May, we asked them, how many events are you going to do in 2020 now? And you can see that they only plan on doing 19 events for the balance of 2020. Next slide, please. So as we discussed some of the earlier slides, they do plan on coming back for the most part, but how will they be coming back? And 43% are going to come back at this point with the same expectation of how they planned on participating originally, with 39% coming back and saying, I'm going to be back, but I'm going to scale back my presence. And I think some of those budget cuts are going to be driving some of that. We also asked an extension question to that of what had they planned on for a presence in that booth originally, and were they going to have a new build? Were they making capital investments in participating in your event? And the majority of the people were, almost 60% were planning on bringing new build componentry into their exhibiting program. That number has now fallen to 19%. But they're still looking at, with 31% of them saying, we still have to look at how do we refurbish our brand to come together in this face-to-face environment. So some good news there, that they are planning on coming back, and they're planning on making investments for the participation in those events. Next slide, please. We all want to know, what do they think about what's going to happen to trade shows? And this slide helps you to understand. They think there are going to be fewer events. They think that the hybrid model is going to be a stick versus virtual events. We're probably going to have lower attendance. Regional events and smaller events are going to launch first. In fact, we as Exhibitor Media Group are going to try a small event in July here in the States. So a lot of that is back to what is the guidance of local jurisdictions on what is available. So, but when you look at the long-term impact of trade shows and what their point of view and perception is, 56% are confident that trade shows are going to survive pretty much intact. 44% believe that they should be concerned about some of the long-term impacts of the COVID crisis. And I think my previous comment about the corporate marketers that saw the reduction in their marketing teams in the Great Recession that never came back, they're now worried again about how is that going to impact their ability to do all the planning, logistics, and execution of face-to-face events within their organization. I think that as you start to talk about some of the changes and how you get people excited to come back, safety is certainly a big part of the conversation. And in the study, we asked them how will they feel confident coming back into the marketplace. And 81%, which would be a case of pretty obvious, if there's a vaccine, they're going to be pretty confident that it's safe to come back. 80% have responded that enhanced cleaning protocols, like here in the States, they're instituting with IAVM a GBAC, Global Biorisk Advisory Council certification program for venues and cleaning protocols to help people understand that cleaning protocols have been enhanced to make safety. But they're also asking, as a respondent, how am I going to have the hotels to do that? So many hotel chains are following suit. How are the airlines going to do that? And certainly the venues where we hold these face-to-face events. And then 63%, they don't even need the vaccine. If there's an effective treatment for it, they would feel more comfortable coming back to the face-to-face environment. Next slide, please. 52% of the respondents believe that it's going to take until Q2 of 2021 for the industry to really rebound. We wanted to share this slide, Kai and I, to help you understand how the respondents came back and said, when will we get to some sense of normalcy in the trade show space? Next slide, please. So one of the challenges that, as Sophie was mentioning earlier about ROI, everybody has to justify their expenses. And what is the value proposition of participating in trade shows and events? Many trade show and event marketing professionals have the belief that the CEO office, the corner office, doesn't really understand what all happens at trade shows and the total value proposition. The good thing about my slides earlier about all the things that they're falling short on now because face-to-face was taken away, that already 25% believe that upper management now really understands the value of face-to-face marketing. And I think that 49% is going to quickly start to add to the yes column versus the no column when you've taken away all of these channels of exposure that they really wish they would have back. So that was my closing. Good news is that corporate America is starting to understand the value of trade shows and events.
And what a note to finish on, Randy. And indeed, there was an op-ed piece in the German business media a few weeks back where the editor was writing that only when something is not there, you notice how much you miss it. And they were applying that explicitly on trade shows and exhibitions, having been taken for granted with the value they bring for a long time. So if that comes out of this, at least some good will have come out of the standstill of the industry. Now, thanks for the data. I've seen a lot of activity on the chat. We'll come to questions after Lisa has spoken, but you get ready for questions, Randy. Okay. Lisa. Let's cross the pond from the US to the UK. Great to have you with us. We've heard the global research from Sophie. We've had the US data from Randy. So, Madam Organizer in the room, what do you do now?
Thank you very much, Kai. And Randal, I was very pleased to hear your closing statement there that the exhibitions are still very much needed globally, so a good place to start. So I don't have many slides, but what I wanted to do is just talk you through some of the feedback and the various tracks that Clarion, but also certainly the wider organising community are most definitely running in respect of their business at the moment, but just as importantly working with their exhibitor set. So in the initial phase, nearly every organiser was very much in that react phase. Most of our efforts and most of our exhibitor efforts was very much focused on postponing events mainly from the first half of the year, and as you mentioned, Randal, moving them to the second half of the year. And so, what we found is a huge amount of interaction with customers, and certainly from the exhibitor set, in respect of securing, I guess, their commitment to the date changes, and also their commitment to a return to live. And certainly from our perspective, but I also know from a number of my colleagues, we actually saw minimum dropout from those exhibitor sets, many of which were keen to stay with the show, and were very keen to continue to utilise exhibitions as a distribution channel and a route to market, whenever that time may be. And so from our perspective, over 90% of our customers were committed to exhibiting at our shows or sponsoring shows, but in a different timeline. The part which was much more difficult, and has been more difficult, is working with new business, and it speaks very much to some of the elements that both Sophie and Randal did talk about, and that's the trust element here. A number of existing clients, or clients that had already signed up, and exhibitors that had signed up for existing shows, had already understood the proposition, and certainly understood the access to the customer set, their customer set, that the shows could provide. And so there was a huge amount of contact with the marketplace, and it very much demonstrated, again in line with what you've highlighted there, Randal, that that sentiment is favourable, that by Q3 that exhibitors would see a return to live, albeit in a different format in some instances, and that there was a need for that to happen in their marketplaces. And what we also found is that the levels of communication with exhibitors actually increased, typically, and this speaks to how I think that organisers will begin to change their interactions with exhibitor sets. This increased perhaps more than it had historically. In one instance, it was because there was a reason to be discussing with exhibitors the move. But in addition, a lot of time was spent beginning to understand much more detailed areas around customers' needs, and how they may want to either pivot or certainly change and amend their approach to accessing their customers between the current period and whenever the next show date was scheduled for. And having spoken with a number of my colleagues from other organising units, that's exactly the experience that they had. And so it was very much a period, and I would say, the last 8 to 12 weeks has been very much spent in that react phase and talking to customers and almost reassuring them that the proposition could stand, but also beginning to manage expectations. And I'll come on to what that may look like as we go forward shortly. And during that period, what you could see is, a need still to connect with either existing customers that the exhibitors had, a need to continue to generate leads in that period, and a need an increased need for information. The exhibitions that we were talking to the exhibitor base around were not the only shows that they would typically attend in over a quarter or even a half a year. So the need and the engagement that they were lacking meant that they didn't have access to as much information, or that they were being bombarded by information which actually was not necessarily relevant to what they were after. And so what we've been finding is that we have much more targeted insight now as to what customers' needs are right now, and how they may begin to change as we go forward. And so what that's allowed us to do is begin to provide digital offerings, and they do vary from market to market and customer to customer, but they are more in order to generate leads at this point and information sharing, with some limited amounts of connections, which has been introduced into there. So that's very much what we're calling the react phase. And then if we move on to the next slide, which we're calling across the industry very much the recovery stage. So at the moment, let's assume that shows will be able to run in the timelines that they have been rescheduled to, and there clearly going to be variances in that case, depending on when they were rescheduled and where in the world they've been rescheduled to take place. But you know, exhibitors' attentions are now very much focused upon what does that look like in the recovery phase, both from an operational perspective, which concerns health and safety and how shows will be delivered, but also from a proposition perspective. Exhibitors, you know, do vary region to region, and you know, we are seeing very much that in some parts of the world a green shoot is appearing. You know, it's clear that at the moment the leader in respect of a return to live at this stage is definitely in China, where some shows have restarted, only a few, but there are a number of other shows which are likely to run in the next month. And so exhibitor sentiment there is much stronger. I think that's because you know, the environment is beginning to get back to normal, or the new normal, in respect of daily life. You know, communities are not in lockdown, so therefore freedom of movement clearly enables some level of confidence that, you know, interaction with others outside of the household is possible in a reasonably safe environment. And so, you know, from our perspective and others' perspective, those shows which are China to China or national to national shows are certainly where we're seeing the most appetite from exhibitor sets. And then that is pretty much the sentiment that we're beginning to see from other exhibitor sets. So what we're seeing, which is very reflective, I think, of what you've said, Randal, is that national shows we think are likely to come back first. And that's mainly because the exhibitors have more confidence that buyers and the buying audiences will likely to be in attendance. If they do not have to travel internationally, then the sentiment is very much that buyer community will be there in a much wider sense, rather than having travel restrictions that may inhibit their ability to attend shows. Which means that international shows and exhibitors at international shows are probably the area where there is most caution from exhibitor sets, and that is in some respects something which will continue to remain, and until there is more clarity on when either quarantine rules or international travel restrictions will be lifted, those are shows which typically have, you know, high levels of international participants, no matter where the show is hosted, is where we're seeing the most caution coming from exhibitor sets. Equally, market to market, as well as geography to geography, is also showing a few trends. And we are seeing, you know, in broad sense, there are more travel restrictions on tier 1 corporates, no matter which industry. Where there are complete travel bans, either for a certain period or for, you know, to the end of the year. And that does cross between exhibitor sets and visitor sets. But interestingly, we're seeing a real push from some of the SMEs, no matter where in the world, to return to a live show environment as quickly as possible. Because for a number of those SMEs, that is their key route to customers. And so that's where we're seeing less cautiousness rather than more. And that is globally, doesn't matter which market we're talking about. However, one thing which is shared amongst all geos and all sectors is the need and certainly the confidence that organisers can provide a safe environment for exhibitors to be present within, and also for exhibitors' customers to be present in. And it will be a new way of delivering shows, but it's an important point to highlight that we as organisers and our partners, which clearly include venues and contractors, do have an ability to control the environment and offer enhanced levels of safety and health for those attending. And so what we've done over the last 4 to 6 weeks, we've been working alongside UFI and their national partner associations who represent a number of the other organisers, and their partners, which also represent a number of venue groups across the globe, to establish a framework which sets out what, why and how we can deliver an environment with our partners that can offer a safe environment, but also one that offers value to exhibitors. For those that don't have access to these frameworks, then please do ask either UFI, who have an extensive framework that we have now developed, which they have developed with their member organisations. And as organisers, we have developed an appendix to that framework, which is called the All Secure Standards. And it's a way of operating that we as organisers believe can demonstrate both confidence to exhibitors, confidence to visitors, and also confidence to the partners that we work with in our teams. And this focuses particularly around 4 cornerstones, and one is around physical distancing and the measures that can be implemented and have already been implemented with those shows that we're running over in Asia. 2, it's around cleaning and counter hygiene measures, very important. Randal, you touched on some of the certifications that are being rolled out in various venues and within organisers' agreements that we can deliver. The third cornerstone is very much around protect and detect. So, you know, we do believe that whether it ranges from temperature checking on entry to venues through to, you know, enhanced medical facilities that can allow us to make sure that this is handled both in a sensitive but also in a very clear way, and which is communicated in advance to any attendee from shows. And the fourth cornerstone is very much around communication. It's become very important that we as organisers can share these steps with exhibitors, and they in turn can share it with their customers. And equally, that when we are promoting the shows to visitor sets, that we can explain very clearly the steps that are being taken to be able to offer that environment which they feel comfortable in attending a live environment. And then finally, the discussion with exhibitors and the area that once comfort is received on the health and safety is very much around the proposition. You know, how will that change as we go forward? What does that mean for the live event? And how will they begin to, how will we as organisers begin to blend and introduce that to live events in the future? And how will exhibitor sets think about reaching their market perhaps in a different way that they have historically? And so, you know, as we've heard in both Sophie and Randal's slides, there are some things which really can only be delivered in a face-to-face environment. And, you know, they will tend to be around buyer seller meetings, product viewings, demos, and VIP hosting. They are things that clearly exhibitors are still telling us that they would like conducted in a live environment. But there are other areas which don't have to be delivered in a live environment, even if they were historically. And they tend to be things around content, lead generation prior to the show, and certainly lead generation post-show. But everything this speaks to is very much around a hybrid offering, which in some instances, some organisers have been delivering to exhibitors, but they tend to be where organisers have already got media titles that are part of their portfolio mix in those individual sectors. But we're seeing very much that customers are now asking for additional routes to market, which are not just through that live environment, but value and ROI at the forefront of everything that exhibitor sentiment is indicating right now. And so that phase in understanding the exhibitor needs now, rather than what they were, is incredibly important and is certainly an area of focus for every organiser right now. And if we assume that volume will be reduced as we go forward, because I think certainly in the first 12 to 18 months, to assume anything otherwise, I don't think it's going to happen, then exhibitors quite rightly are beginning to now demand that there is more segmentation to make sure that they're absolutely meeting the right people when they are at the shows. And that requires further segmentation. It requires almost a return back to basics in how the live event is constructed and which areas actually do allow that ROI to be extended. And just to close up here, just to give some insight, we have over the last 8 to 12 weeks been running a number of digital offerings, and they do range from either webinars through to podcasts through to discussions and roundtables such as this. We took a survey actually, and this crosses between sectors and geographies, and we asked 3 questions. One, which was, are you attending as a temporary replacement to the live show, and would you return to live shows only? 2, would you like digital only in future? And 3, would you like to see both as part of the product mix going forward? And the stats that we got back were attending as a temporary replacement only, and a return to live event in the future was 25%. Do you want digital only in the future? That was 15%. And would you like to see both as part of your product mix going forward? It's 60%. So without comparing notes prior to this this presentation, I'm pleased to say that clearly the information that Sophie has and the information that Randal has, this does speak to the point that moving forward, live events still very much features and focuses in our exhibitor mix, but they do want more. They do want more here. And delivering greater and more obvious value to customers, I think is going to be very much part of how the interaction with exhibitors is going to look as we move forward.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. That was a lot to take in. We have a lot of questions as well, and we are a little short on time after these great presentations. So let me not linger and call up Bala. Bala, I think you should ask the first question because it kind of fits in nicely with what we just heard from Lisa.
Thanks, Kai. This question is to Randal, and basically this is very preliminary questions because when you come back after the lockdown, there's going to be a little bit of fear factor in everybody's mind. So as an organizer, what are the 3 critical attributes an organizer should focus on to get the confidence of the exhibitor to participate?
I can tell you the response in the survey, and I know Kai posted how you can get the entire 18-page white paper, but you'll find on page 10 of that white paper, we asked what would make you feel more comfortable about exhibiting at a trade show or another face-to-face marketing event. I talked about some of the top ones, that 81% with the vaccine, 80% the cleaning of the airports and the hotels and the venue, 63% with a treatment, 54% is no reported cases of new cases in that city, state, or country. So it comes back to Lisa's comment about communication. We got to make sure that we're communicating all of the things that are happening from the organizer side. 41% came back and said it's back to following the crowd. 41% said if other companies are returning to the trade show floor, they're going to be more likely to come back. That chance to dance and do business, they don't want to miss that. So 33% came back and said if offices back to shelter in place, if the common workplace is allowed to open, they'll feel more comfortable. And then 28% responded back to what happens with consumer confidence. One of the things that really none of us have really been able to address in this conversation today is what about the attendee? What is the buyer ultimately saying? And it's, while I can, through Exhibitor Media Group, survey 20,000 people tomorrow on the corporate marketer side, I don't have a database of trade show attendees from all around the country across every sector to see what will get them to come back. So the research that we know is, what is it going to take to get exhibitors back? But their next question is, will buyers be there? And we don't know what the buyers are saying right now. So that's the best I can answer your question.
Thanks, Randal. Thanks, Kai.
Thanks, Bala, and good evening, India. Next question, Benedict. Great to have you with us today. You were talking about the fear factor.
Well, it's very similar to what Bala has asked about the fear factor of both the exhibitor and the attendees. After hearing from Lisa of the protocol that is being taken, it's more comforting. But the point I want to make is, right now, different governments from all over the world and different, even in the US, different state governments, right, or the state governors have their rights. They have giving different warnings, different protocols on how much danger it is to meet or not to meet, to wear the mask or not to wear the mask. How do we again get the message across to say, look, it is safe to come to attend?
Kai, I'd like
so
to.
Who wants to take this? I think it's a lot about the certification and the standardizations.
I'll start.
Randal.
I'll start. Benedict, I think that you're absolutely right, and it's this variability across all, like whether it's Orlando, the mayor wanting to do something, or the mayor of Los Angeles making statements that are outside of what even California or Florida's governors. And in one of the user group task force, we were talking about the challenge that there is such a disparity on protocols about how large gatherings will be able to come together. What is their definition? I think that part of we as an industry goes back to a comment that Lisa made about communication. We have to start, I think that Go Live Together campaign that started here in the United States is really a good step in telling stories about how large gatherings are coming together. Those of us in the industry, the first time we saw a show in China, it was all over social media. We all knew that finally a trade show was happening in China. We as an industry have to do a really good job communicating that trade shows and events are gathering and they're safe and we haven't triggered spikes. So it's a commitment to our industry as a whole, I believe.
And just to add to that, Randal, what we're trying to do, Benedict, is have a minimum level that we will operate within. Now, there are some jurisdictions that may require less stringent measures, but if we have a level which is a framework where in the majority of shows operate within, then I think that will, what we're trying to do is create that minimum standard that will again help with that confidence level.
It is a job we can only pull off if, as an industry, we work together. And I've been in various calls, meetings, gatherings over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and it's always one voice at the table that says we have to be careful. It takes one rogue operator, one show that goes badly wrong, and the whole industry is in trouble. So we are well advised to take care, to do our homework and deliver the right standard so people can feel as safe as we can make them feel safe. I'd like to call up Giri next, because another issue is not about how the individual feels, but also about corporate travel policies.
Yes, hello?
Yes, hello.
Okay. Okay, I wanted to point it out that we have also the issue with the big exhibitors. The multinationals, many of them have canceled the shows worldwide, like DMG, which is Mercedes-Benz of machine tools, no Jimtov in Tokyo, no IMTS Chicago, no shows worldwide. ABB the same, and if you don't have the anchors at the shows, then you don't have the show, because the smaller exhibitors will drop out. So we are running against many walls in this. And it's not only the governmental health rules, but the big companies and even the small and medium-sized companies are deciding not to go to the shows because they say because of the uncertain situation, but of course of their financial situation, which would be the major reason for not going to the show. So I'm not sure how to deal with this. And also the companies, especially in Germany, have a travel ban. They are instructed by the companies not to travel. So I don't know how to work with this issue.
So let me take this to you, Lisa. What do you hear from the big exhibitors versus the vast majority of the number of exhibitors, the SMEs?
Very similar. So, you know, the cautiousness is most definitely in large corporates where there are travel bans. Less so, as I said, in the SME part of the market. And, you know, we're seeing it depends on the individual market served, whether the show can still offer value to those that remain or not. And it does vary because, you know, I think something we're quite mindful of is if a show is smaller, that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't offer value to exhibitors and attendees. It just goes back to the quality of the matching between the exhibitor and the visitor set. You know, so we are taking a view show by show. If there is value to the exhibitor set based upon the audience that we generally, and this is, you know, generally think will be able to attend at that point, then, you know, the dialogue is very different than a show which actually, by pulling out the corporates, you then don't have very many SMEs, or that the corporates are your visitor market, which is actually in some ways even more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a solution, I'm afraid.
No, sir.
But again, I think the key is to deliver a number of exhibitions that run well, and to see hopefully travel restrictions coming down and confidence will grow. Here in Germany, where I'm currently spending my time, it's interesting to see the acceleration of the confidence in the public when it comes to taking back the public space and emerging back from lockdown. We have 3 questions left. I'm trying to squeeze them all in, so we'll run a few minutes over. Maxi, you're next.
So hello everyone, thank you very much for this interesting webinar. I'm also from Germany. My team and I will host an international exhibition which is in the field of power electronics. So having a look at other international exhibitions which are held in November, like Electronica, maybe you know it, which is held in Munich in Germany, and other great shows which are also hosted by our company, which is Misago Messe Frankfurt. I was wondering if any of you has an idea of how big the decrease of visitors coming from abroad could be, in percentage maybe.
We've reached the crystal ball section of
Yes.
the session. Sophie, you haven't given an answer.
Yes, well, I would suggest this perhaps isn't a crystal ball situation, but where we need to pull together as an industry, as we did to create Global Exhibitor Insights at the end of last year, actually pull some of our resources and data and try to answer some of these questions, because it's all very well knowing what's happening on a country by country basis, but so many of us need an international perspective on this as well. Knowing how our visitors in Asia will respond, our exhibitors in Africa might respond. It paints part of a much bigger picture. So I'd really encourage everybody who can help support a wider project to get in touch, because we'll be kicking that off in the next few days and looking to feed back to the industry as quickly as we can with some more quantifiable metrics from visitors and exhibitors, particularly around their international plans.
I mean, the only thing I can add is that when we've been surveying any of our both visitor and exhibitor sets, we have frequently asked the question, if permitted to travel, would you attend? And that's where we're seeing a really high level of response saying yes. But clearly it's very hard to get around the if you are permitted to attend from a international travel restriction basis.
Well, I'd say the exact same thing Lisa just said. It's really not a desire, it's an inability.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So I would revert to my usual, then only time will tell what the future will bring. but we will hopefully see some easing of this. Adeline, second or last question goes to one of our former NGL grantees. Good to see you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for the presentation and the great insight. This question is for Lisa. In fact, you mentioned a minimal dropout rate in your presentation, and in Paris we organized a show, an industrial show, and we had the same response, around 90%. But does it really mean that the exhibitors or even the visitors will come the same way they used to?
So I think when I said minimal dropout, this is an organisation's commitment to still be an exhibitor at the show. I think if we go back to some of the operational delivery, which may restrict, and enforce density measures, then clearly an exhibitor will want to really evaluate how many of their own staff they bring. So I do see that changing. That's not necessarily negative in some respects if they are getting value prior to the show and post-show through different methods. It's one way of them perhaps streamlining their presence. Visitors, it goes back to, I guess, what we were talking about in terms of travel restrictions. I think in the first stage, honestly, I think that visitor volumes will be down. I think it would be foolish to think anything but that. So, it goes back to this point around focusing on who is there to be able to maximise either the interaction value or the value of the exhibitor that is part of that show as we go forward. So volumes, yes, but I think this is where the push for quality will come about.
I think I can add on back to one of my slides in the presentation. 39%, I believe, was the number that said that they'll be back, but they're going to have a reduced presence. Yeah. I think that Lisa's comment is another question that has been an open-ended question about, well, they had all these grand experiences that they had planned in their booth. Are they going to need different booth configurations to do social distancing? All of those protocols and regulations are going to change what they're able to do, but they're already 39% saying, I'll have a reduced presence at that show, but I'm coming.
Thank you.
Last question, Sam North, where are you?
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, from the UK. There's a question probably following up on something that Lisa was talking about with the different types of exhibitors, whether SME or larger. And I was wondering if you had any sense of what amount of lead time they're asking for you about attending or basically getting a go, no go decision for an event in the autumn or the spring or whatever it might be.
Unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. Where you have shows that have huge big move-ins with, let's take some of the industrial type shows, in order for them to get equipment into, a location, country, build up, set up, break down, that sometimes is a huge timely exercise. So therefore, early notification is pretty important. There are other shows which are either more national or more regional that don't have such huge heavy equipment that needs to go in, and you have an ability to have shorter lead times in that respect. But I think the sentiment across most markets will be sooner rather than later, because they have plans, they have budgets, they have staffing, they have to, they still have to operate their business in some shape or form. So typically sooner rather than later. But then that's quite a hard thing to call at times.
Yeah, I can tell you that I don't know an answer to the time frame because of all what Lisa just said, but I can tell you that they've responded that they're frustrated. They're getting anxiety of all the reasons that Lisa they've got to do planning and they don't know whether they should be planning for it, both spend and resources internally. So it's an anxiety frustration for them.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you indeed to all our speakers. That's all we've got time for today. We already went over a little bit, so thanks to all of you for staying with us. Pascal, if you could bring up the slides. Just to sum things up, there were 10 or 15 questions over in the chat. Can we please have the recording of the session? And the answer is a clear and resounding yes. just go to ufi.org/UFI Connects and you can actually see all the, I think, close to 20 UFI Connect sessions that we've produced over the last couple of weeks, and you can see them on demand, and we make them available free of charge to the whole industry, because this is the time when we all benefit from being connected and supporting each other. Share feedback about today in a survey that we will send to you. Please fill that in and help us to find out what we shall put into the program for the weeks to come. Pascal already jumped to the preview. Join us again tomorrow. If your Spanish is up to it, we will do un UFI Connects en Español with the leaders of Latin America. Exhibition industry post-crisis, post-criseria, or however that is in Spanish. How far are we going to change? The first time we do an UFI Connects, not in English. We have a lot of signups from Latin America, so if you want to hear more about the region there, join us there. And on Friday, we're trying something similar. We have always at the UFI Congress, we have a side stage, that's the UFI Exchange stage, where we go and showcase solutions and talks from UFI partners. So we've also migrated that, we've pivoted that into the digital space as well. So this Friday we will host the first UFI Exchange online, and Shenzhen World will run that session and give their case study on how they prepare to reopen. And they will have a colleague from REIT there, and I talked to Hugh yesterday, and they're expecting far more than 100,000 people, if all goes well, to attend their show in just a few weeks. And Shenzhen want to talk how they prepare for that. I don't know if there's another slide. There always is one last slide. The thank you to our Diamond sponsors and partners, to TCEP, to Qatar, to Shenzhen World, and to Freeman. Of course, programming like this needs financial support from partners. Thank you to all of you to join us. Thank you again to Lisa, Sophie, and Randy for sharing their insights. And thank you to all of you for joining. And as we say now at UFI, Zoom you soon. Have a lovely day.